Welcome you all. Today we are going to discuss on lecture 1, which is based on the adsorption process. So here we will be covering about the adsorption phenomena, basic concepts of adsorption, classification. Then we will be also looking on the adsorption isotherm, various types of isotherm like the most commonly used isotherm, Langmuir and Freundlich. We will be going in more details. Then we will be also having the mass balance analysis. So before going into more details, let us talk about some basic terminology about the adsorption. Basically, the adsorption is a process in which atoms or molecules moves from a bulk phase, that is either from solid, liquid or gas onto a solid or liquid surface. This can occur between two phases, namely liquid to liquid, gas to liquid, gas to solid or liquid to solid interfaces. Other terminology used is basically the adsorbent. Adsorbent is basically the substance or the pollutant which need to be separated onto the interface of other surface. And adsorbent is the substance or the material on which the adsorbent is being adsorbed. For example, the activated carbon, various types of bioadsorbent, silica-based adsorbent. So these are the terminology which we use to describe between the adsorbent and adsorbent. And then there is similarly a process which we call desorption. The desorption is the release of the adsorbent from the adsorbent surface back into the water. Desorption process is antonyms of adsorption process. Adsorption means that is absorption of the molecules or atoms or the pollutant onto the surface of the adsorbent, whereas the desorption means that is release or separation of the adsorbed molecule onto the surface of adsorbent to the bulk phase. Let us discuss about the basic difference between the absorption and the adsorption, the two terminology we use to describe the process of separation of molecules or pollutant from one phase to another phase. So absorption, if we say, that is basically the bulk phenomena where the pollutant from the bulk phase of liquid gets transferred to the another phase of solid or gases or to the liquid depending upon the type of adsorbent we use. Whereas adsorption is a surface phenomena where the pollutants or the molecules, atoms, they get adsorbed onto the surface only, not onto the entire volume of the adsorbent. So this basically, if we say, this is assimilation of molecular species or the pollutant throughout the bulk of the solid or liquid which is used as the absorption. Whereas if the accumulation of these molecules or atoms takes place at the surface, then it is called as the adsorption process. So another difference, if we see, absorption is not affected by temperature, whereas adsorption process could be endothermic or exothermic. This depends upon the type of the adsorbent. If it is a physioabsorption, then this could be the exothermic process, whereas the chemiabsorption which takes place, that is mostly the endothermic process. Similarly, if we talk about the rate of reaction, in case of absorption, it occurs at a uniform rate, whereas in case of adsorption, the rate of reaction increases slowly and gets equilibrium after a certain time. So this is a steady increase in the rate of reaction till the equilibrium is achieved. Similarly, if we talk about the concentration of the pollutant or the adsorbent, so that is basically uniform throughout the mass of the material in case of absorption, whereas in case of adsorption it varies and it is non-uniform. Mostly the major concentration of the pollutant takes place at the surface, so surface will be different concentration, whereas within the pores there will be different concentration. So these are the basic differences between the absorption and the adsorption process, and the basic principle that takes place behind the adsorption process. The adsorption is a surface phenomena and is basically the consequence of the surface energy. So this surface energy, where from it comes? Basically, if we see at every surface there is a unbalanced residual forces that exist onto the surface of the liquid or the solid, that creates this high surface energy onto the surface, and due to this there is a tendency of the pollutant or the molecules or the atoms, that species, to come out of the solution and get adsorbed onto the surface whenever it comes to the contact of other interface. So let us discuss about the mechanism of adsorption. So we will be studying here what are different mechanisms through which the adsorption process takes place. So broadly we can classify like 4 types of mechanism. One is bulk solution transport, then is film diffusion transport, then is pore diffusion transport, and finally this is adsorption happens. So in bulk diffusion transport, that is achieved because of the process of advection and dispersion, and this happens when the pollutants, they are present in the uniform concentration in the bulk liquid. So if in this diagram we divide different phases, so if we presume this is the liquid phase where the pollutant, they are dissolved at a uniform concentration in the bulk liquid, and then immediately to this there is a stagnant liquid which is attached to the adsorbent, and then this is the interface of adsorbent where stagnant film appears on the surface, and the transport of molecules, since here all the molecules, they are present here in the liquid at a uniform concentration. So here in this bulk phase, because of this advection and dispersion process, they will be in the uniform concentration, and if we see there is a concentration here and here there is a decrease in the concentration. So this concentration gradient is established, and because of this concentration gradient, the pollutant or the adsorbent that moves from bulk liquid phase towards the interface of solid and liquid, that is within the stagnant liquid film, the pollutants, they will move and they will come to the surface of the adsorbent. If we see the concentration of particle, if we measure, that concentration will be decreasing. So again here if we see, the concentration at the surface is high, whereas the concentration within the pore, if we see, that is having no solute. So here there will be again a concentration gradient will establish, and because of this concentration gradient, the pollutant will move from surface within the different types of pores here, and finally the pollutant, when it reaches to its interior surfaces, so they will get adsorbed because of the 2 process, that is because of either to the electrostatic attraction, because of unlike charges that attacks each other, or maybe because of the van der Waals forces, that is basically the intermolecular forces which holds these adsorbent together onto the adsorbent surface. So this is basically the different mechanisms of adsorption. So here this is basically the different mechanism of adsorbent. Step 1, that is diffusion of adsorbate onto the adsorbent surface. So here this is the surface, all the particles, they get adsorbed onto the surface, and then this is the step 2 where migration of the pollutant takes place within the pores and the micropores. So here from the surface, if again you see, there is a lot of concentration gradient will be there within this pore. So because of this concentration gradient, the pore diffusion occurs and pollutants from surface, they move inside the pores and they get accumulated and finally get adsorbed onto the different pores of this adsorbent. So in step 3, there is a buildup of concentration of this adsorbate onto the surface. So this can be the monolayer adsorption, this can be multi-layer adsorption, that depends upon the nature of the adsorbate and the nature of the adsorbent surfaces. Then let us talk about what are the different types of adsorption occur, what are the different phenomena. So broadly, if we see the adsorption process, we can divide into two processes, that is physioadsorption and another is a chemisorption process. So physioadsorption process, if we say, it arises because of the van der Waals forces, whereas chemisorption process, that is because of the formation of a new chemical compound by breaking the bonds onto the surface of the adsorbent. So this is basically the chemical bond formation occurs in case of chemisorption, whereas in case of physioadsorption, so this is simply the van der Waals forces which attracts the molecules to remain stick and attached with the surface. Physioadsorption, if we say, that is basically the reversible process because this is not having the strong chemical bond. So the pollutants, they are reversible in nature, they can be detached easily from the surface of the adsorbent, whereas in case of chemisorption process, because there is a new compounds are formed, new chemical bonds are formed, so the pollutants or the adsorbent, they cannot be dissolved easily from the surface of the adsorbent because they have different chemical bonding. Another difference, so the adsorbent do not react in case of this physioadsorption process, whereas in case of chemical adsorption process, the adsorbent reacts with the adsorbent and form a new compounds. Similarly, if we see the enthalpy, so enthalpy in case of physioadsorption process, that is very low, that is around 20 to 40 kilojoule per mole, whereas in case of this chemisorption process, the enthalpy is high and that is ranges from 80 to 240 kilojoule per mole. So if we talk about the heat of exchange, so in case of physioadsorption process, normally the exothermic process favorable at low temperature, whereas in case of chemisorption process, this is endothermic process where it favors with the increase in the temperature, the rate of adsorption increases. Similarly, if we see no appreciable activation energy is required in case of physioadsorption process, whereas the chemisorption process that requires high activation energy to start with the process. Then if we look into the type of adsorption like monolayer adsorption, multi-layer adsorption, so in case of physioadsorption process, there could be multi-layers of adsorbate get adsorbed onto the surface, whereas in case of chemisorption process, so this is basically the monolayer adsorption process where there is a single layer of adsorbate that is being adsorbed onto the surface. Then let us talk about different types of adsorbents we use in case of adsorption process. So most commonly used adsorption, that is activated carbon. Then there are other adsorbents also like activated alumina, there is a clay, there is a synthetic zeolites, there are polymers, there are resins, there are silica gels. So even nowadays number of bioadsorbents are evolved. Among these, if we see the synthetic polymers and silica based adsorbents, they are basically very costly and they are seldom used because of their high cost. Whereas activated carbon, that is not very costly and is mostly used in the industry. And nowadays, even low cost of bioadsorbents are available and which are extensively used in treatment process to reduce the overall cost of this adsorption process. Then let us see a simple photograph of this. This is like the white color activated alumina oxide, and then this is zeolite, then this is kind of resins we used, and then these are the synthetic ion based adsorbents. So these are the typical photographs of different types of adsorbent material we use in the process of adsorption. And then let us talk about how these adsorbents they are prepared. As we have seen, there are types of adsorbent wherein the activated carbon is most commonly used in the industry. So let us discuss more about its preparation and its properties, what are the methods by virtue of which we can prepare the activated carbon. So let us talk about the different process. So the first of all, we have to select a base material. So base material could be the wood, it could be the nut shell, it could be coconut, it could be shell material, it could be lignin, it could be coal, it could be bones, or any carbon containing material which can be taken as a base material. So first of all, we need to select a base material. Then preparation of the base material is also important, because this base material that contains various types of impurities which we need to clean it out before it goes for carbonization, which is the second step in production of this activated carbon. So carbonization is essentially a pyrolysis process which results into carbonization of base material that converts it into a char material which is very rich in carbon content, and this process is carried out by heating the base material to a red heat at a temperature of around 700 degrees centigrade, and essentially it is done in absence of oxygen. So this is done because if there is a lot of oxygen present, it will oxidize the carbon materials. So when this base material is heated to a temperature of 700 degrees centigrade in absence of air and gets converted in the form of a char. And then we need to go for activation. Activation means basically the development of porous structure within this char material which is produced as a result of carbonization. So this is essentially done by adding the steam or carbon dioxide gases or any oxidizing gases at temperature of around 800 to 900 degrees centigrade. So this char material is further kept into the muffle furnace and it is heated to around 800 to 900 degrees centigrade, and after this is exposed to a oxidizing gases like steam or carbon dioxide, which develops a porous structure in the char material and thus creates number of pores, micropores, nanopores, different size of pores within the char material, which enhances its internal surface area. So this is the process of activation, which is basically very important to increase the specific surface area of the adsorbent. So finally, this activated carbon is produced, and then if we see during this activation process, the following chemical reaction takes place. The carbon is there in the char material when it is exposed to the water vapors, so it will form the carbon monoxide and it will form this hydrogen. So these gases are eluted out and then creates the porous structure. So properties of this activated carbon which is generated out of this activation process, that basically depends upon the type of the base material we have used and also on the kind of methodology we have used to prepare this activated carbon. So even after this activated carbon is prepared, then we can have its surface modification, we can add different types of surface charges, functional material which comes under this surface modification, and how this is done we will be looking into the further slides. So similarly, we discuss about the synthesis of other natural adsorbent using the chemical activation process. So here we will be described about the SANA. SANA basically is the full form, if we see, that is super adsorptive natural adsorbent, which is derived from non-usable bale fruit cells. So that is called a BFS for drinking water treatment. So this kind of adsorbent, how it was prepared, this is a simple methodology just to illustrate. This is like the virgin bale fruit cells. So we have collected it. Then the chemical activation process is done by adding phosphoric acid, and this phosphoric acid, when it is added into this will dissolve all types of impurities present into the bale fruit cell, and after this activation further we give the thermal treatment at around 500 degrees centigrade. We prepare this activated char, and this char then can be used as a super adsorptive natural adsorbent, that is SANA, and this is basically used for removal of natural organic matter present in the water. So when we add this SANA, super adsorptive natural adsorbent, into the water, so it will remove out the pollutant and the water will get free from the different types of pollutants. So this is the FESM image before and after the process of activation. So this is FESM image of virgin bale fruit cell, whereas this is the FESEM image of the chemically activated bale fruit cell. So here we can see after chemical activation the pore size, the internal pores, they have been developed of larger size as compared to the virgin fruit cell. So this is how the process of developing the natural adsorbent is carried out and the process of its chemical activation. So this is basically the expanded view of the internal structure of the adsorbent material, like activated carbon. If we see this, a small piece of this, if we further enlarge it, we will see there are number of pores, different size of pores, hair size pores, then comparatively bigger size of pores. So this, depending upon the diameter of the different pores developed within the activated carbon, we can classify like micropores, which have the diameter more than 50 nanometer, whereas mesopores, which have the diameter varies between 2 nanometer to 50 nanometer, whereas the micropores, they are basically having size less than 2 nanometer. So the micropores, they have the size having the diameter less than 2 nanometer. Then let us see the various properties of the granular and activated carbon derived from this process. So if we see, these are the parameters, like if we see the particle size, surface area, bulk density. There are a number of properties if we see. So if we compare, this is granular activated carbon and then this is powder activated carbon. The basic difference, both are activated carbon. One is having smaller size, one is having bigger size. So the size range more than 0.1 mm, they comes under granular activated carbon, whereas the size having less than 0.074 mm, they are called as powder activated carbon. Similarly, if we see, the surface area is very high, that is 700 to 1300 meter square per gram, whereas in case of the powdered activated carbon, the surface area is much higher compared to the surface area of granular activated carbon, that is 800 to 1800 meter square per gram. So similarly, here we can see the bulk density, that is 400 to 500 kg per meter cube in case of granular activated carbon, whereas it is 360 to 740 in case of powder activated carbon. Basically, if we see, this is a typical example of the various characteristics of granular and powder activated carbon, which is normally used in the industry for removal of various pollutants using this adsorption process. So then let us talk about the various factors, how this adsorption process is affected, what are the different factors. So let us talk about the nature of the adsorbate. So nature of the adsorbate, if we see, if there are liquefiable gases like ammonia, HCl, chlorine, sulfur dioxide, they are basically readily adsorbed than the other gases like O2, nitrogen and hydrogen. The adsorption process also depends upon the solubility of the adsorbate. So if the solubility of adsorbate is more, the adsorption process is less, like the rate of adsorption will be less. If the adsorbate is insoluble, solubility is less, then the adsorption of that pollutant is more. So similarly, if we see the nature of the adsorbent and the surface area, it is highly dependent upon the surface area of the adsorbent. So this adsorbent is basically, as I told, there is a different types of adsorbent. There are costly adsorbent, there are low cost adsorbent, there is activated carbon which is mostly used. So this is very selective in nature, which is based on its cost, its efficiency, its adsorption capacity. So this is very selective, and basically if we see the adsorption and the surface area, that is basically in direct proportion. More the surface area, more is the adsorption. Similarly, the presence of active groups on the adsorbent surface, like if there is a polar or activated groups present, so it will increase the process of adsorption. Then let us see another factor, that is temperature. As we have discussed, there is two types of adsorption, that is physioadsorption process, there is a chemisorption process. So in case of physioadsorption process, normally the adsorption process is not affected, but if we see overall, this is inversely proportional to the temperature. So physioadsorption process with increase in the temperature will decrease, whereas it is favored in case of low temperature. Whereas in case of chemisorption process, so this chemisorption process again is temperature dependent up to the equilibrium limit is reached, then it is inversely proportional to the temperature. So chemisorption process, basically if we see, that is endothermic in nature, so it will increase if the temperature increases, and if the temperature decreases, the rate of adsorption will also decrease. And this happens till the equilibrium is not achieved. And after the equilibrium, this chemisorption process, again it is inversely proportional to the temperature. See the pressure, this is another important factor which affects the process of adsorption. As we discussed, pressure in case of chemisorption process, the adsorption is not affected by the pressure, whereas in case of physioadsorption process, it increases with increase in the pressure. So this is like the illustration. Here if we see the rate of adsorption, if we plot the pressure onto the x-axis, we will get a kind of this curve. So it demonstrates that the increase in the pressure will increase the rate of adsorption till the equilibrium is achieved, and after that there is no further increase in the rate of adsorption even after increasing the pressure. So then let us discuss about the various types of adsorption isotherms. Let us discuss about what is adsorption isotherm. So adsorption isotherm, if we say, that is a mathematical model or the functional expression. This depicts the distribution of solute between the solid and the liquid surface at the equilibrium at a constant temperature. So this basically gives the quantity of adsorbate that can be absorbed per unit weight of the adsorbent at a constant temperature, and the relation showing between the quantity of adsorbate that can be absorbed per unit weight of adsorbent at a constant temperature is called as the adsorption isotherm. So if we see the equation, QE is equal to C0 minus C into V upon M. So if we see, QE is basically the adsorbent phase concentration after the equilibrium, means how much adsorbent is being adsorbed per unit weight of adsorbent. So this we can get by multiplying with the volume of liquid. So the adsorbate phase concentration after the equilibrium can be computed by this equation, whereas QE is the adsorbate phase concentration after the equilibrium is achieved. It means the milligram of adsorbate that is absorbed per unit weight of the adsorbent, and C0 is basically, that is the initial concentration of the adsorbate, that is in milligram per liter. Similarly, CE, if C, that is the equilibrium concentration of adsorbate after the adsorption process occurred, and this V is the volume of the liquid that was taken in the batch study, and then M is the mass of the adsorbent that is being added to the solution for adsorption to occur. So we can say this QE value that can be find out by using this equation. So this is how this equation came, that is simple a mass balance analysis of the adsorption process. Suppose we take a sample having certain initial concentration, we add some adsorbent into that, and then after the adsorption process is occurred, we take out the sample and again measure the concentration of that adsorbate in the solution. So we can have a mass balance of how much is being adsorbed, how much is being there in the liquid phase. So this all the analysis comes under mass balance analysis. So if we see to find out this amount of adsorbate that is being adsorbed, that will be equal to initial amount of adsorbate in the solution minus final amount of adsorbate after the adsorption is over. If we say C0 into V, C0 is the initial concentration and V is the volume of the solution taken. So this will multiply C0 into V will give you the amount of adsorbate initially present into the solution, and similarly CE into V, that will give the amount of adsorbent that is now present into the solution after the adsorption process is done. So this will be equal to, that will be the amount of adsorbate being adsorbed onto the adsorbent. So this will be QE. If QE is the milligram of adsorbate being adsorbed per gram of adsorbent, M is the weight of the adsorbent that is being added. So multiplying this will give you the total amount of adsorbate that is being absorbed. So by balancing this, the amount of adsorbate initially present in the solution, then after deducting with the amount of adsorbate present in the solution will give us the amount of adsorbate that is being absorbed, and that can be finally calculated by QE, and this QE will be equal to C0 minus CE, that is the concentration difference before and after the adsorption, multiplied by volume and then divided by the mass of the adsorbent. So this is basically the mass balance analysis. This is required to develop the various isotherms. As we have discussed, there are various isotherms, number of isotherms, but in this course we have taken the two important isotherms which are most widely used in the industrial wastewater treatment process. So this is Langmuir isotherm and the second one is Freundlich isotherm. So we will be discussing one by one in more detail of all these isotherms. So let us discuss about the first isotherm, which is the Langmuir isotherm. So this is the equation, that is Q is equal to Qm into Ka into C divided by 1 plus Ka into C. And if we see Qm, basically this denotes the maximum adsorption capacity, which the unit will be milligram per gram of adsorbent. Now this Ka, basically that is the Langmuir constant, which is the function of the enthalpy of the adsorption and the temperature, whereas C is basically the concentration of the pollutant and Q is basically the adsorption capacity. So before going into the more details, let us see about the various assumptions that are made during derivation of this Langmuir model. So one important assumption, that is reversible process, means adsorption is reversible. The molecules attached onto the surface can be detached, it can be dissolved back to the solution, and there is a monolayer adsorption, and then the enthalpy of adsorption process is same for all. So these are few assumptions that we take while derivation of this Langmuir isotherm. So if we see the linearized form of the Langmuir equation, we can rewrite it as 1 by Q is equal to 1 by Qm plus 1 upon K into Qm to the whole multiplied by 1 upon C. So this is basically the equation which is used as a linearized equation of Langmuir model. So in this equation, if we see equation of straight line, if we see this is M, if you see this is taken as X, and if we see this is taken as C, and if we take this as a Y, so this will give as a straight line equation in the form of y is equal to mx plus c. So if we plot x versus y, means 1 upon q on to the y-axis and 1 upon c onto the x-axis, we will get a curve. So this curve basically will define the value of different parameter of Langmuir model. So if we measure the slope of this equation, that will give you value of m. So this m value will basically give the value of m will give 1 upon Ka into Qm. So this is basically the slope of the line that will give us the value of 1 upon Ka into Qm. If we extend this line here, so we'll get certain intercept value. So this intercept value, if we measure, so this will be equal to 1 upon Qm. So this is basically the determination of various model parameters of Langmuir isotherms. Similarly, the Freundlich isotherm, if we talk about the Freundlich isotherm, this can be explained by this equation, x by m, that will be equal to Kf into Ce to the power 1 by n. So whereas Kf is basically the Freundlich capacity factor, which is equal to milligram of adsorbate into liter of water that per milligram of adsorbate to the power 1 by n. So this is the unit of Kf, that is Freundlich capacity factor, whereas Xm, if we see, this is the mass of adsorbate that is being adsorbed per unit mass of adsorbent. Similarly, if we see Ce is the equilibrium concentration of adsorbate into the solution after the adsorption is over, and then 1 upon n, that is the Freundlich intensity factor. So if in this equation again, if we plot the linearized form, if we take log of the equation on right hand side, left hand side both, so we will get its linearized form. And so if its linearized form will be log of x by m will be equal to log of Kf, that will be equal to 1 upon n log of C. This is again is in the form of a straight line relationship. So if we plot this log of xm onto the y-axis and this log of C onto the x-axis, we will get a straight line equation whose intercept will give the value of log of k, whereas the slope will give the value of 1 by n. So this is how we can determine the Freundlich model parameter for describing the Freundlich isotherm. Concepts, mechanism of adsorption, various types of isotherms, then how these isotherms are developed using batch and column studies, what are the different design parameters for designing a column, adsorption column. So this all the topics we will be studying in the next lecture, that is lecture 2 on module 2. So thank you.